So today I want to demonstrate for you guys something that I grew up doing. My mom always loved baking. She taught me how to bake. And so the thing I want to show you guys how to do today is how to bake brownies, because I feel like a lot of people just go to Walmart or go to the store and they buy like a box brownie mix. I feel like it's just as easy to make it from scratch, and it also tastes better. So today I want to go through some of the ingredients and supplies that you'll need. I want to go through how to prepare the batter, and then I also want to go through how you're going to bake this and how you're going to store this when you're all done. So first I want to start out by going over some of the ingredients that we're going to need and the supplies that we're going to need. So we're going to need, I have these all already separated out. It makes baking a lot easier. So we have 1.5 cups of sugar here, and then we also have 3/4 cups of flour. We also have 2/3 cups of cocoa powder, and then we also have 1/2 cup of powdered sugar. We have 1/2 cup of chocolate chips. Now this is variable. You can use however many you really want to. I know some people don't even like chocolate chips in their brownies. They say it's too chocolatey for them. So it's kind of whatever. You can add anything you want to these brownies. This is just kind of a base recipe for you to start out. And then I also have 3/4 teaspoons of salt. Almost said tablespoons. We don't want that. And then I have 2 large eggs, and I already have these cracked and into a bowl ready to go. Just saves you time whenever you're actually mixing stuff. So I also have a 1/2 cup of veggie oil. You can use olive oil if you want to. I normally just keep veggie oil around the house, so I'm going to use that. And then I have 2 tablespoons of water, and then also have 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. So as for our actual supplies that we're going to need, I have 2 medium mixing bowls, and you'll see why here in a little bit. And then I have a silicone spatula. I also have a whisk, and then I have my baking dish. I use a 7x11. You can use a 9x9, an 8x8. Just keep in mind that your baking time is going to increase or decrease based off of the dish that you use. And then I also have some cooking spray, so we'll need that here in a little bit. So also too, before I start doing any baking, I always just go ahead and preheat my oven. So I have my oven preheating right now to 325 degrees Fahrenheit. So now we're going to start out by mixing our dry ingredients. And our dry ingredients are going to be our sugar. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in the bowl. And then we're going to have our flour. Go ahead and get all of that in there. And then we're going to have our cocoa powder. And then our powdered sugar. And then we're going to put our chocolate chips in there. You can do this last. The chocolate chips don't have to go in the dry. I just find it easier to do it right away. And I'm going to put my salt in there. So that's all of our dry ingredients. So I'm just going to give that a whisk. You just want to get these really well mixed before you mix your wet and your dry. And the reason we're doing this separately is because once you mix your wet and your dry ingredients, your rising agents activate. So I like to think of baking as a science, and you don't want those chemical reactions occurring until you have this in the oven and heating. So I also would like to recommend that you sift through like your powdered sugar, your cocoa powder, to make sure there's no clumps in there. You don't want clumps in your batter, because if you bake that like that, then you're going to get chunks while you're eating it. That's never fun. So now that we have our dry ingredients mixed, we're going to go ahead and mix our wet ones. So I have our eggs, and I'm going to put our oil in here, and then I'm going to put my little bit of vanilla. And then lastly, I'm going to put our water in there. And you're just going to give these a good whisk. It might be a little bit difficult to whisk these together just because eggs are a little bit hard to mix into things. Okay, so once we get these all mixed together, we're going to pour now we can mix our ingredients. Since we have everything combined, we're going to go ahead and pour our dry ingredients into our wet. I do this in parts. I find it easier to do like 3 or 4 sections. It just makes it easier to mix it without being super messy. Granted, I am a pretty messy baker. This is probably the neatest I've ever had my table in baking, and it's mainly because I'm demonstrating, so I don't want to be super messy. And it also helps to not be messy by, like I said, getting your ingredients ready beforehand. it's going to help not create as much of a mess because you're not going to be pouring it all at once. So, and you don't want to over mix these because if you over mix it, it's going to over activate your rising agents before it gets in the oven, and then it's going to have like a rubbery texture to it, and with brownies you really don't want like a rubbery texture. So my batter's getting a little thicker, so I'm going to take the whisk out and I'm going to start using my spatula. So I'm just getting the leftover batter off of that. So now I'm going to put the rest of my dry ingredients in here, and now I'm going to use the spatula to mix it, just because it gets a little more difficult with the whisk. I find it easier to mix with the whisk at first, just because it's so thin, and then you're getting all those initial clumps out of there if there's any left. You don't want any clumps in your batter, otherwise, like I said, when you eat it later, you're gonna get a big clump of like flour or sugar, and that's not gonna taste very good. So once you have these good and well mixed, we're done preparing the batter. So these are and this is going to be really thick, by the way. It's supposed to. Brownies are going to always be a little bit more thick. I like my brownies extra gooey. I kind of like to think of it as the more gooey it is, the thicker it's going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and use my cooking spray, and we're going to spray our pan. You're going to get a good layer. If you prefer taking these out of the pan after they're cooked as well, you can use parchment paper. I usually just leave them in the pan. Find it easier to just cut out whatever I want in the moment. So we're going to go ahead and put our batter in there. So now we're going to go through how to bake this. So I'm just going to dish this in here. And it's going to be a little hard to scrape out because it's pretty thick, but that's okay. Okay, so now that I got my batter in here, I'm just going to use my spatula, and I'm just going to spread this out throughout the pan so you have an even layer, and I'll show you here in a sec. A little bit hard to spread it out, but we're getting it. Sometimes you just have to work at the corners a little bit. So you can see here that I have a smooth, even layer. So now what we're going to do is we're going to stick this in our already preheated oven. It's preheated to 325 now. So just stick it on the middle rack. You want it kind of in the middle, not too high, not too low to your burners. So I'm going to go ahead and set my timer. You want to bake these anywhere from 35 to 45 minutes if you are using the 7x11 pan that I was talking to you about. I usually start out with 35 and then I poke it with a knife or a toothpick just to see how much you want it to be, about just a few crumbs coming off. Okay, so now that we have those in the oven, I'm going to talk to you about how to store these. So I actually already pre-baked some brownies, so I can go through with you how to store these whenever you're done. So here are my baked brownies. They were in there for about 40 minutes, and then I went ahead and cooled them. You want these to fully cool before you take them out of the pan, so probably about 2 hours. So these have been cooling for about 2.5 hours. So you can either store these in an airtight container, and they can be stored at room temperature or in the refrigerator for up to 3 days. You can also, if you're like me and you're living alone, then you maybe won't eat all these brownies right away, so you might want to store them in the freezer, and you can store those in the freezer for up to 3 months. So I just want to go over what we've kind of talked about today and done today. So we have talked about what ingredients you need to bake brownies and the supplies that you'll need. We've also talked about how to prepare the batter for brownies, and we've also talked about how to store them and bake them. So I like to include at the end of any type of baking anything, I like to say that baking is a science, not necessarily an art, and make sure you follow the directions when you're baking, no matter what you're baking. So thank you for listening.